Dear Dr. Sharice, my opportunity to take a lot of the questions that you all try to slip in my DMs and do something constructive.
Dear Dr. Sharice, are y'all ready for this?
The goal is for us to have honest, courageous conversations, pretty much with no topic off the table.
Let's go.
Hello and welcome back to Dear Dr. Sharice. Let's get into the question of the day. And let me say, you all have provided some incredible questions. It's pretty amazing to open up this opportunity for you to put in the questions that you want answered. And there's not one of them that I haven't thought, oh my gosh, that's great. Oh, that's a good question. I've heard that before. So thank you to everyone who has contributed both in season 1 and season 2. And for those of you who are like, wait, I didn't even know that was an option, don't worry. There will be continued opportunities because I know that you all find this so valuable. And how do I know? Because you tell me. Today's question is from Jamie L., who is from South Carolina. She's talking about the concept of lifelong mindset. And she says, I feel frustrated sometimes knowing that I can't ever go back to the old me. The changes have to be lifelong, and I feel like I grieve that sometimes. I think today's episode is going to tug at your heart. I believe they all do in some way. So before we get in, let's take a sip. Grief is one of those dynamics that we don't enjoy talking about. And I'm not attempting to immediately go in and make this a challenging dynamic or something that feels too heavy or low. But grieving parts of your old self, I believe, is something that doesn't get enough conversation when it comes to the process of change. So let's talk first about what does it even mean to have a lifelong mindset? If you were to go and look up this term, you're going to find a lot of different things. But one of the central themes around a lifelong mindset is going to be parallel to a growth mindset. And when we're moving in that place in our lives, it essentially means that we recognize that we will need to evolve and that is going to be a lifelong process, that just when you think, oh, I'm good, things are great, then something will happen in your life to remind you, you still have work to do. And that's not a bad thing. Some of you might even be saying, well, what about the moments that you feel like you're working on the same thing over and over? That's necessary. A lot of the changes that we want to make are something that we need to work through and repeat. Repeating those lessons helps us to sustain that growth. And it's also that dynamic around the more we learn, the more we go through a process and surrender to it and accept the changes that need to happen in our lives, the more cemented it becomes. I don't know why this analogy is in my head, but I want you to think about the concept of reading. Imagine if we decided way back in kindergarten, first grade, oh, I know how to read now, so I'm done. I don't need to do anything else. Well, if we stop there, our level of understanding, our level of assimilation, our ability to broaden our minds and create understanding and apply that understanding in context would be extremely limited. So in order for us to grow that part of our mind, we have all chosen, or most of us have chosen, to be lifelong learners in some way. Whether you're reading books, whether you're listening to podcasts, whether your favorite thing to learn is the bottom line of ESPN, fellas, what's up? And I'm not saying that women don't, but you know what I'm saying. Either way it goes, anything that we want to do well and we want to have an opportunity to change our lives for the better is going to require us to be open and to really trust that the process that we're going through is meaningful. Now, one of the things that I want you to also think about is, where is it time for you to grieve and let go of some specific thought pattern or behavior in your life. Let's make this an application piece. Let's say that you have a piece of paper. I want you to split that piece of paper into 3 columns. The first column would be the behavior, the thought, the mentality. Our thoughts and behaviors make up mentalities, but they can all be different, and I want to give you different words so that you can decide what's there. And then in the second column, I want you to put current situation. So I want you to think about, how does that specific thought impact your current situation? And then in the third column, I want you to ask yourself the question, do I want to stay here? Because when we're fighting with ourselves because we want the old self and the new self to coexist, which doesn't happen well, then we find that we may be stuck in a place that isn't where we want to be. Let's break that down using an example. Let's say that one of your behaviors or patterns is that movement in your life is something that you do because you feel like you have to. Let's say that it's something that you invite into your life because you've attained a certain look, or you were always taught that this is something that a good person does. So it's not coming from a place of, I have the privilege of doing this, or I want to do this. It feels like a chore that you've disciplined yourself to get used to, but you don't love it. And your current situation is, there is fear involved with your level of movement. There's this part of you that wants to gravitate and explore different ways of moving your body in order to get cardiovascular health, in order to feel strong, but you're so afraid that if you do anything different than what you've always done, that you'll end up where you were. So that push and pull keeps you trying new things and then reverting back, but not necessarily because you feel like, oh, I just love it and miss it, but because there's a fear of evolving into a new you that has a different relationship with moving your body. I'm going to take a sip. So that last and final question, do you want to stay here? Do you want to stay in a place where movement is rigid? It is mechanical, not disciplined and not consistent. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about the place in your life where you feel like you are a slave to doing things a certain way because it is connected to fear and it controls every aspect of your day. You move and schedule your entire day with very limited flexibility around being able to check all of these boxes. And don't get me wrong, it can be scary to feel like you want to be flexible in that place, because if you come from a mindset or a mentality that has been all or none, you fear going back to the none. But true lifelong mindset means that you trust yourself in order to grow, to shift, to change, that you recognize you're not the same person that you used to be. You have, and you're working on creating a different relationship with yourself. The other thing to consider using that same example is there are a lot of things that we hold on to and we grieve letting go because at a certain point in our life, those things were valuable to us. Going back to the concept of movement, maybe it was something that at a certain point in your life, it became purpose. It's allowed you to operate and to step into places and areas in your life that you never thought possible. So that's amazing and that's great. But what is your identity outside of that thing, that thought, that relationship, that pattern that you're unwilling to let go? And what do you need to do to grieve the old parts of yourself? When we think about the concept of who we are and old self versus new self, I want you to think of yourself like a tapestry. A tapestry is like pieces of, let me give you a visual, of yarn or tight string that are interwoven and interconnected in different colors. And so putting them all together creates this amazing visual, but then there is a thread of a certain color, a certain gold, or a certain dynamic that will always be a part of that tapestry, i.e., always be a part of who you are. So, what I'm saying by that analogy is being able to recognize that there are parts of you that were necessary in a certain part of your life. They were a crucial aspect of being there for you and helping you survive different situations. But in order for you to walk toward your highest place of potential, in order for you to walk into the loving and sustainable relationships that you desire, in order for you to move forward with confidence and freedom in the vision that you have of yourself, it's time to change some of the colors. And notice I said some, which means you don't have to fully leave yourself behind. There are parts of you that will always be with you, but you want to think about, if you are a recipe, how much of those old thoughts and patterns and experiences are still informing this new recipe, and something's not quite right with how it tastes. Have you ever thought that about yourself? Like, oh, you're doing so well here, you're doing so well there, but for some reason, it's not sticking. There's no staying power within the change that you're making. And that is a primary indicator that something in your life needs to change, which means that there's a part of you that it's time to say, I appreciate the fact that you were there for me. I appreciate this part of you self that was defensive and moved everyone away and pushed people back in very rigid boundaries in order to protect yourself. You were there when I needed you. But now you're keeping me away from really bonding and finding the love and connection that I've always desired, so you can retire. Another way to kind of consider the dynamic of grieving past parts of yourself is sometimes it's a matter of just putting those parts of you on the shelf, right? You know they're there, but you don't need them every day. You don't have to keep all of those parts of you out all the time. It's an aspect of going, these parts of who you are available to you at a moment's notice. But they don't have to be the first thing that you grab. And you don't always want to grab the same mentality. You don't always want to grab the same way of doing things. You don't always want to go to that one specific narrative if you know it's holding you back. So what if you're listening to this and you feel like, okay, I'm really resonating on what you said in different levels, but I don't know how to start? Go back to the application piece that I gave you at the beginning. Make that something that you do on a daily, on a weekly basis. It would even be a really great thing to do in your relationships, and really consider for yourselves as a relationship, whether that's in your professional relationships or your personal relationships, what's the current situation? What do you notice is on repeat, but not in a good way? Where is it time for you to really take great inventory and then work towards what's next? I know that you love tips and tools and they're great, but you have to get to the root. And tips and tools are like cutting off things at the surface, but not getting to the root of the weed that can come up and grow and choke out your growth. So before we can get to the tips and tools, and I will give those to you on another podcast, then what I want you to consider first is, let's dig deep. What do you know needs to go? Where is it time for you to find a different way and give yourself permission to grieve? Hey, this is scary. I'm not used to operating like this. I've always been this way is really another way of saying, I don't know any way else, or I don't know any other way to cope with life the way it is. This is how I've always been. Just because it's how you've always been does not make it right. It's time. It's time for you to move forward in whatever way that's significant for you. And I have a feeling that you already know the exact place in your life that if you would be willing to do the hard work of navigating through that space, releasing and letting it go, which starts with being aware. That's the first step. You have to be aware of your current situations and mentalities and thought patterns and where they're taking you. And then second, you have to decide. You have to make a decision. I'm willing to do what it takes, and I'm willing to go through the discomfort, because on the other side of that, you know that something amazing is possible. Now, let's be real. You might think, but I don't know that, and that's part of my problem. Then you have to be willing to take a risk. Awareness, decision, and risk. Risk is always a part of growth that no one wants to tell you. So if you're the kind of person that you feel like, well, I don't want to grow until I know that I can be successful, good luck with that. Because anything that we do takes an act of hope, takes an act of faith, and takes a risk. We're putting ourselves on the line to say, I don't want to be here anymore. And I want to say it again. It's time. There is something better than what you're experiencing and what you're holding on to ahead, but you will miss it. And when you will not see it, you will not get a chance to experience it in the way that you could if you don't get over yourself. And so this is your opportunity to do it. Before you leave this moment, I want you to take time, if possible, to sit with the activity that I gave you. I don't want the things that I share to you just be conversation. I don't want them to just be conversation. I want them to be tangible, lifelong tools that you can come back to. This whole concept is something that you can revisit. Look up the 5 steps or 5 cycles of grief. They're a cycle because they go through the map. I don't want to give them to you because I don't want this to be about grief. But I want it to be about an awareness that growth requires a decision that may be hard and may mean grieving part of yourself, but you're willing to take the risk because where you are right now is not where you want to stay. That's the bottom line. And we know, because I tell you all the time, that knowledge is not power without application. So the awareness is the knowledge. But the power comes through the decision and the risk, which are the application pieces. And you can take a calculated one, but do something. Don't give yourself permission to stay where you are. Even if you're in a place of overwhelm, I want you to sit in the process of reflection and awareness because you're on your way to making a decision that is going to shift your life. And of course, don't allow this to be our last opportunity to connect together. Continue to come back. Join me here on these podcasts. I'm also on Cadre every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. EST. Cadre is spelled C-A-D-R-E. Use invite code Dr. Reese, D-R-R-E-S-I, and join me live as well as enjoy the yoga, the meditations, and some pre-recorded material that will continue to help support who you are. If you're listening to this through audio or through video, make sure you stop and check out the show notes so that you can keep up with all the things that are going on in my world and ways that you and I can connect. And until we see each other again, cheers.